All right. Well, welcome everybody to our March 3rd Zero Waste Goshen webinar. It's a partnership between the City of Goshen Department of Environmental Resilience and the Goshen Public Library. We're really glad for everybody who's able to join us tonight. We are here to meet Sandra Ann Harris, who is the author of this wonderful book, Say Goodbye to Plastic. And we'll be hearing quite a bit more from her in a little bit. My name is Aaron Sawatsky Kingsley, and I'm the director of the Department of Environmental Resilience here. We've got Christy here, Christy Helmkamp from Goshen Public Library. Teresa Saylor is in the background, along with Sharon Hernandez too, from our communications department. I want to just quickly alert everybody to some of the upcoming webinars that we have in this series and sort of a sister series that's going on at Goshen College. So our next webinar in this series will be April 14th, and that's Goshen Zero Waste. Yes, it's the Goshen Zero Waste Seminar, and it's No Kitchen Gardening, No Waste Kitchen Gardening. And this is a book that is available at the library. This is one that we have been looking through along with folks from the library. We think this is going to be a great book to explore with the author. Let's see, we'll also have coming up later on then on April 28th, a conversation with the author of the book Compost City. That'll be a really interesting one for us to pay attention to. The Goshen College sort of sister series. Let's see, we'll be hosting a conversation with author J.B. McKinnon, who we had at the end of last year in this series. A really fascinating discussion about what happens to our waste, and he will be hosted online at Goshen College on April 7th in a noon conversation. So those are some of the upcoming things that we wanted to announce. Also, just a real quick plug for our Ashley Van Verst Sensory Trail app is finally live. It can be downloaded from the Google App Store and the Apple App Store too. So check that out. You can search for it simply by entering Sensory Trail. There's no other such app anywhere in the world, and it's a really unique kind of thing for us to be having hosted here in Goshen. Okay, that's enough for me. I'm going to turn it over to Christy, who can introduce us to Sandra.
Sure. Well, thank you, Aaron. And I'm Christy Helmkamp from the Goshen Public Library. I'm our Development Community Engagement Manager, and we are thrilled to be part of this initiative with the City of Goshen, Zero Waste Goshen, as a way to educate our community and find ways that we can reduce our waste production. So as Aaron said, tonight we have author and entrepreneur Sandra Ann Harris. She wrote a book called Say Goodbye to Plastic. And we are going to be spending a good part of this evening just in conversation, asking her questions. So as we are going through her book and her process, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, because we are more than happy to ask Sandra questions for you. But also keep in mind throughout the night that we may be asking you questions, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. And I am going to bring up a set of slides for just a moment, and we will officially kick off our conversation with Sandra. So Sandra, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Hello, everyone.
To kind of get us started, can you share a little bit about your journey to becoming an author, to creating Say Goodbye to Plastic?
Yeah, well, in terms of the author part, that came to me quite naturally. I was a journalist for 15 years, and so my first career was writing. And I have a master's in investigative journalism from Ohio State University. And so I've always wanted to write about plastic. Now, the harder part was to become a plastic pollution activist and entrepreneur, because I had never run a business before I started Eco Lunchbox in 2008. I had been writing for many, many years and researching as a part of my work as a journalist. But when I sent my son off to preschool and started to become more aware of all of the plastic throwaways that are generated at lunchtime, I thought, well, there's got to be another way. I was just kind of following what the moms of the older kids were doing and packing a conventional lunch at that time, including like a juice box and squeezy yogurts, and sometimes even the little cracker packs with the spreadable plastic cheese stick and the little cheese. And so I was following along and sort of doing what everyone else was doing. Even though I had been a lifelong environmentalist, I really hadn't given much thought to plastic until I had sort of a plastic light bulb moment, which I describe in my book. And I was going to pick up my son, and I can read a little bit from the book about how I woke up to the issue of plastic pollution as well. But I was going to pick up my son, and he was in the sandbox at the back of the school, and they had me walk through the lunchroom, and the staff hadn't had a chance to tidy things up yet. And the trash cans were just billowing plastic waste. I mean, it was shocking. Like all those juice boxes I've been sending, all those, individually wrapped cheese sticks and cracker packs and stuff that I would just grab and go. Well, all the other parents have been doing that too. And so it was sort of like, a cartoon. I mean, literally, it was so dramatic. And I went, whoa, this is crazy. There's got to be another way. So that's how it all started. And at some point, either now or a little bit later, I can read a bit about that from the book.
Yeah, that would be great. So you had that as your starting point. What kind of took you to the next step with everything?
Well, the next step was, if I'm not going to be packing a lunch with all of this single-use disposable plastic, I still need to feed the little guy. What do I do now, right? How am I going to reinvent lunch? What am I going to send him as food in, for starters? And at that time, there were reusable plastic containers available on the market with lids that you press down hard and they sort of snap onto the top. And so that was an option that I tried, even though, because of my background as an investigative journalist, I was starting to get wind of the fact that plastic is made from, and everyone in their head can probably fill in the blank now, right? But at that point in the early 2000s, people didn't realize plastic is made from petroleum, right? We just thought of plastic as plastic. And I think another misconception at that time was that if there was a problem with plastic, wouldn't our leaders be protecting us from using it if it was somehow toxic to humans and the planet? Wouldn't somebody say something? So most people sort of thought of plastic as sort of a benign thing that we used, all of the time, and then we would just put it in the recycling, right? And then everything was fine. But as I was starting to dig into this issue, starting with the shock over seeing this huge pile of trash in the cafeteria, and then starting to dig into, what is plastic? And if I don't use plastic, what could I use? I was at the playground with my son, and we were living near UC Berkeley at the time in the San Francisco Bay Area. And another parent and I got into chatting while the kids were playing. And lo and behold, he was a researcher at UC Berkeley working on lab rat studies involving bisphenol A, which is a chemical that is used in the production of rigid plastics. And I say is used, I don't say was used, I'm saying it still is used. Now, many parents, especially savvy ones that are, watching out like a hawk for the health of their children, probably are now looking for BPA free plastic. At that time, there wasn't awareness of bisphenol A and the fact that it's an estrogen mimicking chemical. But I'll just interject on myself here. Even the BPA free plastic, sorry folks, they have replaced the BPA with bisphenol S, and lo and behold, what does the S stand for? Substitute. They didn't get too creative with the name of the new chemical that they're using to get that functionality out of the plastic. And unfortunately, BPS, which most people don't know about, has even a higher estrogen mimicking toxicity than the original BPA. So everything was sort of starting to add up. It's like, whoa, this is a lot of trash. Oh my gosh, I certainly don't want my child eating food that's been in these plastic containers with this estrogen mimicking material, and then handling the lids and then using little hands to take the food out of the container, and then the hands go in the mouth, and then I was just like, no, you've got to think out, beyond what's right in front of you, which is all this reusable plastic. And so eventually I decided, because nothing was on the market, to bring to life Eco Lunchbox, which is my small green business and socially responsible business, putting to market for the last 13 years a line of plastic-free food containers made from stainless steel, and some of them have no leak silicone lids. So this is healthy for people because it's non-toxic, and healthy for the planet because it's reusable solution. So over the course of the business, we have sold hundreds of thousands of these plastic-free food containers all over the world, and our user community, who instead of using throwaways are now using our eco lunch boxes, are averting tens of millions of pieces of trash from use and disposal every year, because the containers just keep ticking. Like, you could just use them and use them. And so we worked with a group of MBA students at the Presidio School, where they offer a degree in MBA for sustainability. And they came up with a quantitative model to generate this statistic, tens of millions of pieces of trash. So that's a bit about how I got started. And I do share in the beginning of the book, which is part memoir, one woman against all odds, starting this business at my kitchen table, self-funded, part memoir, and then it's part education. Why are we having this problem with plastic pollution? And then inside the book, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, I break down the rooms of a typical house, and I give tips for every room for people who really want to roll up their sleeves and say goodbye to plastic, whether it's in the bathroom or it's in the kitchen. That's where I started, the wardrobe, the dining room, or wherever. Everyone can kind of pick their portal and start wherever they want.
Sandra, one of the themes that I picked up as I was working through the book, and that you kind of alluded to here, or I'd like you to expound on a little bit, is the design that you ended up with for your eco lunch boxes. You refer to it in the book as sort of a back to the future moment.
Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about that? What that means, in this context, because I think there's, as I said, I think there's a theme that flows through your book of Back to the Future. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad that you picked that up as a reader. I think when we're faced with these complex problems, we think, oh no, this is going to be really hard. You know, what am I going to do next? Maybe I have to innovate a new type of material that's not plastic to replicate the plastic, you know, likeness of the containers that we've been using heretofore. But so often, if we just look back at what future generations have done, or even look back at how indigenous people lived lightly on the land, the wisdom is held within the generations. So one of the first products that I brought to market was a stainless steel double-decker container from India, where they call those tiffins, right? And so for generations in Asia, South India particularly, but in other parts of the world, and even here in the United States, early in our history, our lunchboxes were always made out of metal. It wasn't until World War II, when the use of plastic was popularized, that we started to see so many things being made of plastic. So that's one example. Another example that I talk about in the book is a few years ago, I was going through some old scrapbooks with my mom, who's 82, and she was showing me all of these mementos from when she was in high school. In the late 40s. And we got to a page in the book, and I was looking, what's that? I'm thinking, and there's like a little announcement for some sort of a social boy-girl dance party. And then right next to it, there were about a dozen colorful straws taped into the book, as, you know, just a fun thing to say from the event. Well, they weren't plastic straws, you know, they were paper straws, right? So everyone's thinking, oh gosh, what are we going to do if we can't get our plastic straw at the restaurant? Well, it really wasn't that long ago that we weren't using plastic in the same way that we are now. So paper straws now have become more popularized, like it's some new great idea, but it's really a back to the future idea. And I'll give one more example from my life. I'd go to visit my grandparents when I was a child, and they would store their leftovers in their refrigerator, not in plastic containers or glass containers with plastic lids. They would put the leftovers in a small bowl and then use a saucer or a small plate on top to create a lid. Totally reusable. They didn't have to buy anything extra. Like, brilliant. So I do encourage our Eco Lunchbox community and readers of my book, Say Goodbye to Plastic, a survival guide for plastic-free living, to look back in their own lives, and if they can't, you know, muster, you know, something that they themselves experienced as a young person, ask earlier generations, because the wisdom is still walking and talking right now. And we can find a lot of solutions. Not to say, you know, that I don't think it would be awesome if we could come up with innovative new materials to replace plastics. And some of you probably have heard about, you know, corn resin based plastics and other bioplastics. But sometimes those solutions are actually worse than actual plastic, because they really can't be biodegraded and they can't be recycled. And why are we growing all of these plants just to turn them into a plastic? So we're using, you know, water and carbon from the soil, and, you know, we're tilling and mowing and equipment and, you know, transporting to take something that's living from our earth to turn it into something that's just not going to be able to biodegrade. And even though plastic is very little recycled, at least a small percentage of it can be recycled. And that's not true with the bioplastic. So it can be hazardous, this road to innovation, you know, because sometimes things aren't the panacea that people might hope.
Well, thank you, Sandra. So one of the things or concepts that comes up as we were preparing this initiative and in some of these webinars is there's just so much to do and becoming overwhelmed by like where to start and how to keep going. And looking at your book, my favorite thing was how you structured it, because you went like room by room and it was like, okay, I can just focus on one space at one time. Do you have some examples that you could share with us that are like your favorite plastic-free tools and why? And let me know too if you want me to pull up the slides again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, where to start? You know, there's no right answer for that. You know, I have people tell me, you know, Sandra, I'm not like you. I can't figure all this out or whatever. I'm like, well, you know, what matters to you? You know, is it not most important to you, you know, that you pack a reusable lunch? That's fine. I said, that's my personal passion. And that was when I had my light bulb moment. It was my portal. It was my door, right? But what I encourage people to think about is, you know, where would they get most excited about saying goodbye to plastic? The typical thing for people to do as a first step on the journey to being plastic free, and I can talk about what that means, plastic free, is bringing your own grocery bag. And I'm thinking a lot of the citizens who are joining us today may already be doing that. Then there's the bring your own coffee cup. And there are other things that we can do out in the world. But with the pandemic, it has become, well, some of the restrictions have lightened up, but I'm going to say it was quite difficult in many parts of the country to bring our own grocery bags or our own coffee cups because of concerns around transmissibility of the virus through touch, which has turned out to be kind of a false worry, fortunately. And so a lot of the opportunities that we have, like bring our own bag and our own cup, and even to bring containers and buy products in bulk, you know, from bulk bins, you know, where you pull it and you can fill your container and then they weigh it and they back out the weight of the container. That's called the TARE weight, TARE weight. Those have come back. And, you know, we can bring our containers to restaurants and other things out of the home, but that sometimes can be challenging and you need to have the agreement of the restaurant or the store or whatever. But in our own homes, we get to do pretty much whatever we want, right? I mean, there's no one around to boss us and say like, oh, sorry, no composting in your house, or, you know, oh, sorry, you've got to use that throwaway single-use lunch item or plastic bag. We get to choose, you know, with very few barriers what we do. And so that's why I decided to focus the book, even though I do have some tips about what to do out in the world. I have a section about travel, which isn't actually a room in the house, but that's the only one. So we cover in the book, I'm going to look at the table of contents. We cover kitchen and shopping, bathroom, bedroom, dining room and entertaining, office and school, closet and clothing, laundry room and cleaning. And then I have the travel section. So yeah, I really encourage people to just kind of go where their attention flows. And the book is written with the idea that, heaven forbid, people don't have to read it from the front to the back. I wrote the book with an index and with the idea, maybe it's because this is how I like to read, people can kind of jump into whatever room they want. They can read from the middle out, or they can read from the index and just look up things that are interesting and then pop in. So I hope that the flexible format is really inviting and not intimidating, because a lot of people do get kind of locked up, you know, when somebody says, you know, what are you doing to say goodbye to plastic? Ah, deer in the headlights. No, just pick a room and start to weed plastic out of that room. and give it a little effort in that one, but that hopefully you can then notice the progress that you're making instead of just feeling like, oh, I'm not making any headway, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Sandra, I wonder, would you talk a little bit about clothing? I mean, that certainly fits within the house, within any number of rooms, the way that you've kind of modeled your book. But one of the things that you write a fair amount about is clothing and the kinds of plastics that are embedded within much of our clothing.
Yeah, plastic can be very insidious that way. It's, in a lot of things that we don't even know it's in. Yeah, it's interesting. So many of us like to have stretchy clothing and synthetic clothing, and unfortunately, hate to share the bad news, all those polyesters and synthetic fabrics come from, a plastic resin base. So back to the old reduce, reuse, recycle. People don't think of reduce, reuse, recycle when it comes to clothing. We get that like in other areas of our life, but fast fashion has become, so prevalent, buying things so cheaply. How they sell t-shirts for $5, at some of the big box stores, I really don't even know, So the first thing I always advise people to do is reduce. So just be really particular about what you're buying and only buy stuff that you're going to use. And if you can, buy it secondhand. So the young people these days are really into thrifting. So I think all of us can get really into thrifting. And as I explain this, you're going to see that I'm making a circle. So we're going to reduce, we're going to reuse, which means use as long as possible. And then we're going to recycle, which I'm going to do a hyphenation before the fabric is donated to actually be recycled, like the cotton or the wool or the natural fibers actually can be recycled. If you give them to a thrift shop, they're going to sort the clothes, and anything that can be resold will be resold. And hopefully that's what we're going to be buying, everyone else's clothing that they have donated and that it's available for resale. And then the heavily used items that are made from natural fibers are able to be recycled. I think a lot of people don't realize that. So long as it's one type of fiber, if it's wool mixed with polyester to get the stretch, or cotton mixed with some other kind of a plastic synthetic, then recycling that is very, very difficult. There are some new technologies, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, where the fibers can be melted down, and using a very high-tech system, they separate the fiber liquids and then they respin it into new fibers, and that's all very cool. But that's sort of in the development phase right now. And most of us, when we discard our old clothing that is too old to be interesting for someone to buy at resale, that's going to end up in the landfill, unfortunately. So we're, reduce, reuse, recycle, and then we want to create a circular, having it go around and around, so that what we're buying is from other people's discards as much as possible. And otherwise we're trying to buy with natural fibers whenever possible, so that again, we can get the going around. It can be reclaimed, recycled, remade into new fibers. And we want to have a circular economy developing.
And it's also, as I understand, it's also a way to help avoid the production of the microplastics, right? That come out of our clothing, especially in the laundry cycle. And as you write, and as I've read other places, I mean, some of those microplastics, I mean, they work their way into our soils, into our water systems, and back into our bodies as we eat things that have eaten those microplastics.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that point up. Yeah, the microplastics during the washing cycle, especially the fleece. It's so awesome that they're taking plastic water bottles and they're spinning them into fleece. That's awesome. It's very circular, but unfortunately, not just fleece, but as you say, and I talk about this in the book, all of these synthetic fibers, when they're sloshing around in our washing machines, they're knocking off little tiny particles. Now, there are some solutions for that, that we can put either filters on the drain for our washing machine, or we can get something called a coral ball that will trap these microplastics so that they don't push through with our wastewater, because even the wastewater treatment facilities cannot filter these micro bits of plastic because they're really microscopic. So yeah, I mean, another example of like awesome that they're, trying to innovate and use the plastic water bottles, sort of like what I was talking about when it comes to the bioplastics. I like that, it's great. People are trying to, but then there can be unintended consequences. So yeah, look at the tag when you're buying your clothing. If you can buy clothing that's made from upcycled fibers and fibers that are not plastic, you're going to be doing yourself and the planet a favor for sure. That was great. I'm glad you followed up on that.
So Sandra, if, just kind of getting back to your journey, you talked how you started in the kitchen and looking at how you were, designing eco lunchbox and everything. So once you kind of started with that, what were your next steps to keep going and keep inspired with your journey, to keep that momentum going?
Yeah, great point. I mean, I'd like to ask everyone to think about, for a second, what keeps you going? Why do we keep showing up at work? Why do we keep doing what we're doing? Because I started this journey in 2003. I started my company in 2008. I never set out to be a plastic pollution activist, entrepreneur, or author. Plastic sort of picked me. So I don't know if any of you have that feeling, but as Jacques Cousteau said, we protect what we love. In my opinion, many of us continue to find reservoirs of strength and inspiration if we tap into what we love. And so as I'm giving my talk, I'm also happy to give some stats and facts, but I find that, talking about our kids and our parents and our grandparents, and the people we love and the places we love, and I think now might be a good time for me to read this passage from the book, can embolden us to do things that we might otherwise think are too difficult. I before I started Eco Lunchbox on my kitchen table, the last thing I'd ever sold was Girl Scout cookies. Like, I didn't know anything about product design, pricing, how to get something to market. Like, in fact, I had always sort of turned my nose up at business and consumer products. I always, was working on the nonprofit side. I was working as an investigative journalism, giving voice to the voiceless, that sort of thing. The thought of me ever deciding to start a company like Eco Lunchbox and design, manufacture, and put to market a line of plastic-free products wasn't something that I had ever imagined. But when we did it within the framework of educating people about plastic pollution, inspiring them that there is another path, and empowering them with our plastic-free lunch boxes. I'll show one of them now. So this is an example of one of our products. It's a stainless steel container with a silicone base. And I don't know if you guys can see, but on the lids, we have ocean embossed design. So this one is a wave. And I'll show the design of this one. And this is another container. It's a double-decker container with a stretchy strap connecting the two. And then on this container, this is our blue water bento container, we show eelgrass, which is a plant that grows in the bays around here and forms the kind of foundation of a biosystem, you know, for all life. And so all of our containers are to educate, inspire, and empower. And our hope is that when people are using these containers, they're connecting with their values and connecting with who and what they love.
So Sandra, we actually do have a question, and this might, you know, be a little bit more digging on our part too, but our question, you know, they're expressing, we know every little bit helps in terms of reducing plastic use, but have you come across in your research how much plastic waste is generated from households versus manufacturing and other industries?
That's a great question. I don't have that statistic at the tip of my tongue, but there's the individual action, you know, which started globally with the bring your own bag movement about 20 years ago, and it's rippled out to what we're seeing now, you know, in you know, mainstream media headlines. And just yesterday, the United Nations signed a global resolution against plastic pollution, and they have put in place an outline of how, as a global community, not just individuals, but also enterprise, needs to shift habits and become responsible for our overdependence on plastic. So industries, for example, now who put to market very cheap plastic products and make a lot of money selling them again and again and again, you know, disposables, for example, many of the things that, you know, I talked about in a typical disposable lunch, the value of the plastic is very low. It's very cheap. So why would they put some sort of a food item in an expensive glass or stainless steel container? There's no motivation, right? But at end of life, who pays for the disposal of that plastic? It's individuals paying their garbage bill. It's cities who are managing the landfills. So one of the things that the United Nations resolution aims to solve, and there's also a national Break Free from Plastic Act that is making its way through Congress, is this very question of how to hold responsible the producers of plastic and the sellers of plastic, so that when they're selling us their plastic, it's fully loaded with all of the costs that are actually incurred over the lifespan of that plastic, from the time it's taken out of the ground, extracted as oil or gas, and it's manufactured into plastic pellets, it's put into a product, it's used, it's discarded, it's either recycled or disposed. There are costs to the environment, carbon footprint costs, greenhouse gas costs, landfill costs that right now are being shouldered by all of us. So that's a great question. I don't have the breakdown on that, but our policymakers are looking at that aspect of plastic pollution and the burdens that it puts on us, and seeking to make this much more of a team sport, not just the responsibility of those of us who are going to try to do our own part and reduce our dependence on plastics at home. So would this be a good time to read about the, okay, so before the question, we were talking a little bit about, you know, what keeps me inspired, what keeps me going on, and I'm encouraging all of you out there to think about what inspires you, what will light your heart up enough that you're, you know, think again about, you know, how you're leading your life, and look with a critical lens at, you know, maybe there is some plastic that you're over depending on. So in the beginning of the book, I talk about going to the edge of California on the Pacific Ocean at a very low tide. And this is the kind of tide that just happens a few times a year, at least during waking hours. And there's a huge strip of land that usually is under the water that is exposed along the cliffs of the Pacific Ocean, and it's called the Intertidal Zone. So I'm going to just read for a couple of minutes about this hike to give all of you kind of an idea of, my mindset and what keeps me going and how, I love my time in nature. Our plan was to travel a stretch of California rarely seen, to discover the beauty of this protected stretch of unsullied coastline. Our hearts soared when we found black, metamorphic rocks lining our path. They were studded with brilliant orange sea stars, bigger than our hands. Muscular bull kelp and a tapestry of iridescent seaweed shimmered at our feet. Nubby black mussels blanketed the rocks like chainmail armor, warding us away from the higher, drier routes and into the slippery tide pools that were churning like washing machines with rhythmic swells. There we were, greeted by underwater fields of blossoming sea anemones with their turquoise mouths and tentacles ringed by army green polyps, hungrily gaping to the sky in hopes of snaring a passerby. Christy, I'm thinking this would be a good time to show that slide with some of these pictures. So I'll keep going and you could put that up. This bountiful marine beauty was matched by a symphony of roaring waves, barking sea lions, and cawing seagulls. Immersed in an oceanic soundscape, our eyes, ears, and hearts felt cradled in nature's sovereignty. Our suburban lives seemed light years away. The next slide, I think, is a good one. But then our attention shifted and our hearts sank. We caught sight of a rainbow made of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of brightly colored plastic objects in all sizes and shapes that had washed ashore and mounded along the foot of the 200-foot tall cliffs. There was no escaping the reality that our idyllic adventure had hit a dead end. Instead of nature's beauty, we were flanked by mountains of plastic. The constant rhythm of the Pacific waves marked the closing of our tidal window and our marine adventure. Like a metronome counting down, it reminded us with each incoming swell that the time allotted us on this sliver of land was fast closing. So when you're doing this intertidal low tide hike, the tide is rising. So as you're walking, the ocean is coming closer and closer to the cliff. So you have to get from one end to the other. It's a very cool stretch with just abundant sea life. It's in a national park and a marine sanctuary. So, even in these very, very protected areas, plastic knows no boundaries. The ocean just brings it in and washes it up. So now our time, we're staying too long. So staying past our welcome was decidedly unwise, but we had to do something about all the plastic that had been choked up by the ocean. There was no time for regrets, for recriminations, for jovial fake promises that we'd surely come back another day when we were better equipped, had more money or people or equipment or time. We filled our arms and buckets with what the sea had spit out, like gardeners pulling psychedelic run-amok weeds from a long forgotten, untended rock garden. hauling flip-flops, fishing floats, trawling lines, toothbrushes, tampon applicators, buckets, baskets, water jugs, and endless broken bits of plastic from every room and part of human life that lay littering our path. We beat our way down the beach to safe passage. We trudged through sand dunes dusted with minute confetti-like plastic specks too small to gather, also called microplastics. Like the leftovers of a massive beach party gone wild. Arms and hearts heavy, hardly having made a dent, we wondered if our efforts had been futile, if we'd made a measurable difference. Our cleanup efforts were admittedly a drop in the proverbial bucket, yet we were joyful for having acted on our love for the ocean. And I knew we would gladly return to do it all over again. Love is a force as powerful and unstoppable as the tides and breakers of the ocean.
Thank you, Sandra. And I think your intro perfectly encapsulated your journey and kind of where you were going in your mission. We have had another question come up in the chat, and it's tied to non-plastic water bottles. So with your company, do you have non-plastic water bottles? If so, what and how are the silicone tops made with, or is it recyclable?
Yeah, great question. We don't sell water bottles. They're pretty widely available. I would recommend Clean Canteen water bottles. They're also a socially and environmentally responsible company, and they have an excellent line of water bottles. About the silicone is made from silica, which is sand, and it's the same thing that's used in glass. And it is recyclable and safely can be incinerated, unlike plastic, which cannot safely be incinerated. So we work with TerraCycle and recycle any mailed back lids through them. And there are other opportunities to recycle silicone as well. And there's a search tool on our website for people who want to look for silicone recycling near them. It's not typically available curbside, but it can be very effectively recycled and made into pellets and remade into new products.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm thinking it might be nice now to talk about some of the swaps that people could make.
Yes.
So I'd like to ask all of you to take a moment and imagine a chair. I know it sounds a little random, but pull up in your mental, Rolodex, like a picture of a chair, and I'd say, pull up a chair. And now Christy's going to show us a slide. Okay. So I'm wondering if any of you thought that a chair looked like this. Probably a lot of you thought that a chair had 4 legs and, a back sort of like the one on the left, but certainly didn't have, 10 legs or any of these shapes. So I was interviewed recently by a journalist who in a previous career had been a psychologist. And I was talking to her about how a lot of people have a fixed mindset when it comes to what products they use for different household activities. And, I was like, yeah, people they're like, if I don't use, what am I going to use? They can't figure out what to do next. So that's in large part why I wrote the book, because the back of the book, as we started to talk about, is a resource guide for people to pick a room, enter that door, and do a deep dive into all of the easy swaps that they can do. So in psychology, what they call this fixed mindset is functional fixedness, that they see only one idea to get the job done. So I wanted to go through kind of a little game today with you and share, and you can put me back on full screen, Christy, some of the swaps that I recommend in the book. So let's play by starting with, can everyone imagine a toothpaste tube? I'm guessing that many of you envisioned something like this, right? And I wonder if any of you envisioned that toothpaste could come in a glass bottle and be a chewable tablet. Did anyone think that toothpaste could look like this? So this is a plastic-free solution for toothpaste. Why doesn't everyone think for a minute about what a razor might look like? Probably many of you have razors that look like this, made out of plastic, right? And what about if you did a razor like this with a blade that can be replaced and used, and it's at end of life, it's entirely made out of metal and it could be recycled. It's a valuable material that can be reclaimed. Now envision a toothbrush. Probably many of you envision something like this. This is what our dentists usually give us. I've been trying to get my dentist to stop giving me toothbrushes that look like this. Too often it seems like they are giving us these, plastic freebies, and we don't even want them. And it's an unnecessary expense on their part, and it creates unnecessary waste on our part. So what I like to use is a toothbrush like this. Now, there are some toothbrushes with biodegradable brush ends. This one has polyester. I don't like to use the ones with like the boar hair, but you can get an entirely biodegradable toothbrush. So the first thing that I do when my toothbrush is worn out is I use it for laundry and for cleaning, right? I usually tie a ribbon or something around it so that no one will mistakenly think it's actually for use as a toothbrush. And then when it's time to dispose it, I just snap this head off, and the amount of trash is this little head. It's not the whole toothbrush.
Sandra, and tell us what the rest of it is made of.
Bamboo.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. So bamboo, and it's biodegradable. So then what about takeout containers? A lot of our takeout containers look like this. What if instead, when you got takeout the next time, you brought an eco lunchbox, a stainless steel reusable container? You bought it once and you could use it for years and years. And at end of life, you could recycle. Well, these are not really designed for end of life. So if you didn't need it, you could, give it to a friend or donate it. But let's just say like you backed your car over it or something crazy happened. You could definitely recycle the stainless steel and the silicone, right? And I have a couple of other examples. We've talked a little bit about microplastics, and a lot of you may be still using dishwasher pods. The little pods, and they have kind of a film on the outside. Those unfortunately do not dissipate with the hot water. They result in microplastics, which again, we're trying to avoid. And then the other option is some kind of a plastic bottle with a liquid dishwasher detergent, which again leaves you with unnecessary plastic. What about a cardboard box with powdered detergent? That's a traditional, Back to the Future kind of solution, right? A couple more things. Most of our kitchen brushes are made from molded plastic. What if you were to get one that was made entirely from natural materials? And you could just separate the steel, take it apart, slide this down, take it apart, and then you could biodegrade the brush and the handle, and you could recycle the metal. And then the last example is sponges. A lot of our kitchen sponges are made from plastic, and at end of life, they're trash. But there are a lot of great biodegradable sponge options. This is sort of a sponge cloth, and it's made from 100% natural and certified compostable materials. It's from cellulose, and some of them are made from recycled organic cotton, and there are lots of options, but you don't have to settle for what you've been doing for the last several decades. You know, there are a lot of great easy suggestions in my book that I think people can really hit the go button on, and it won't be stressful or expensive.
No, well, thank you, Sandra. Erin, do you have any other questions for Sandra?
So, Sandra, why don't you touch just a little bit here? We've only got a few minutes left on plastic packaging. I mean, that is something that you talk about a little bit in the book as well. I mean, and that's something that we are keenly aware of in the era of Amazon everything that comes in a plastic package, as well as any of the other stores that we, actual real stores, brick and mortar stores where we shop.
Yeah. Well, vote with your pocketbook whenever you can. There are companies, not a lot, unfortunately, like Eco Lunchbox, that everything we do is plastic free, including our shipping. Even our tape is plastic free. Like, it can be done. It's it's not impossible. But short of that, finding companies that are already shipping plastic free, go on to the chat at Amazon and request that your account be flagged at plastic free shipments only, because they have developed recently plastic free mailers, made out of recycled paper. Now, I'm going to say it's not 100% reliable. You still may get some shipments that have their typical, plastic pouches, but I feel like it was noticeably better for people that I know after they made that request. And the other thing is, if you have favorite online retailers where you like to buy things, speak up. One of the first things that we can do as active, engaged citizens is to use our voice. So, put it in the comment when you're checking out, please ship my order plastic free, or what is your shipping policy? Because a lot of the gas extraction that's happening in the United States, the fracking is to make the polyethylene that is used for plastic bags and packaging and films, and is the most common disposable plastic around. So hopefully we can, get our business favorite businesses to stop using so much of that. It's not necessary. Like, we use around our products, we use tissue paper to protect them from dust and prints. That's like a back to the future solution for sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sandra. And it looks like Teresa shared in the chat. If you are not already following, we have a Zero Waste Goshen Facebook group where we've shared some plastic statistics for you to learn a little bit more about what we were talking about here tonight. Well, as we're wrapping up, again, Sandra, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion and enthusiasm for transitioning to a plastic-free lifestyle. As Erin mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, our next Zero Waste Goshen webinar is on April 14th, and we will have Katie Elzer-Peters here to talk about no waste kitchen gardening. Again, one last thank you to Sandra, and everyone have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you.